Hi folk, my name is the MetaGoblin and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be counting down 10 individual features within Skyrim that may have possibly made it a better game in certain people's opinion. You know, in these videos I'm not stating which game is better in its entirety, since that's a dangerous thing to do on YouTube, and you may be interested to know that I have basically made a video talking about certain features that were done better in The Witcher 3 than Skyrim. And just lastly, the things I talk about in this video are not necessarily my opinion. I mean, people have been complaining that I've been contradicting myself in these videos, but I'm not, because I'm trying to acknowledge other people's opinion, you know, and keep an open mind. I mean, most of the reasons in this video have been conducted by reading your comments. And all of these reasons are just simply differences between the two games, like a feature in The Witcher 3 might be better simply because it wasn't in Skyrim. But anyway, let's jump in. One of the things I personally disliked about The Witcher 3, which I guess other people might prefer, since it's not a thing that really completely can change your opinion about the game, and that's simply that the fact there is less freedom in The Witcher 3. Really, this is just me making a little bit of nerdy fanfiction, but I would have preferred a less restrictive role-playing game, where you're not forced to become a particular character with particular abilities. Obviously there is a lot of choice in The Witcher 3 as to how you want to play the game, but when you've got a world and a lore as huge as the Witcher universe, I mean, I've read most of the books and it is pretty huge. Sometimes I just want to be a wizard or a sorceress or a druid or a dryad archer or even some kind of meaty dwarf warrior, rather than being forced to be a witcher and a specific character. I mean, why not have Geralt as an important character in the game, like Martin in Oblivion or Brynjolf in Skyrim? You could be a character part of the story and adventure, but that story and adventure is more customizable depending on the kind of character you create. Personally, I think there could have been a lot of potential for the game because the Witcher universe is just huge, and there's probably enough stuff there to even make an MMO. Another thing I think people didn't like about The Witcher 3 was the character development, and I definitely think Skyrim's had a lot more choice and detail, because obviously The Witcher 3 had to be accurate to the lore, which restricted the potential in a way. In Skyrim you had an abundance of different skills to choose from and perks to make them a little bit more interesting, which meant you could easily play the game over about 10 times and come up with really crazy and unique builds. But I think The Witcher 3 just generally had less variety and less replayability. I mean, the perks were interesting and felt satisfying to invest into, especially when they manipulated the gameplay and made it more interesting. But the thing that irritated me was how you had to invest a certain amount of points to go further down the tree of perks, which meant you would have to play the game for quite a long time before you could unlock them, which was a problem when I played the game because there was no DLC out for the game, but I guess it's less of an issue now since there's much more content to experience so you can get higher levels. But it also restricted your ability to become a bit of a hybrid. Like in Skyrim you could mix things up like magic and swords, but for a long time when you play The Witcher 3 you're going to have to be the same kind of build for quite a while, quite a few hours into the game, whereas in Skyrim, literally the first second you play you can have a mixture of anything you want. For my third reason, we're going to talk about immersion. I think both of the games are incredibly immersive, but they do it in different ways, and depending on which way you like the most is obviously based on a particular person's preference. The Witcher 3 does it through deep storylines, fleshed out characters with realistic personalities, and its setting design. I mean, Novigrad is easily the most immersive medieval fantasy city you ever walk through in any game, unless somebody else can tell me any different. But Skyrim has less interesting characters, I have to admit, and stories. I'm not saying they're bad in any way, but it's obvious the developers wanted to focus more heavily on the gameplay to keep it fun and interesting to attract a larger audience. I mean, I have a friend who can play the crap out of Skyrim into the ground, but he has played The Witcher 3, but not as much, and that's simply because he finds the story boring and he gets tired of skipping everything, and that's just the way he is. I mean, he doesn't read books and he doesn't really like long dramatically or challenging films, it just prefers action and comedy films, and a lot of people are just wired like that, and it's basically Bethesda's business model to make games for people who like a bit of story, but still make a game for people who aren't really that into story focused games and just want to beat the crap out of a troll with an axe. So there's less development into the quests and stories of Skyrim, but Skyrim is still in ways a more immersive experience than The Witcher, and that's simply because you can become part of the world of Tamriel rather than just experiencing it, What I'm talking about is basically how you can turn up to an inn, and you can rent a room, and that innkeeper will take you to your room, and if you sit in a chair for a while, then a bar wench will come and offer you a drink. You can also get married to certain people, and each person has, unique little quests to do in order to win their favour, and you can also obviously have your own house. But in The Witcher 3, you're forced to either fall in love with Triss or Yen. You've only got two options. If you're very stupid, like me, and trying to get with both of them, you get a very sad ending where you don't get either of them. That actually, personally, really depressed me. When I got at that ending, I kind of felt really sad. And but I'm not saying it's a problem, I'm just saying how it does kind of, the game kind of limits you. Now, for the fourth reason on this list, it is something that wasn't completely absent from The Witcher 3, but nonetheless it wasn't as big and developed as Skyrim, and that is simply dungeon crawling. Obviously The Witcher 3 was more about big boss battles and open world skirmishes, but I couldn't help but feel that the game could have, just done with a few more interesting dungeons, like really long dungeons or really long elven ruins to explore, just to make it a bit more interesting. Obviously there were some good dungeons in The Witcher 3, but I reckon the game could have done with just a few more, because there's only off the top of my head I can remember one that was particularly long, probably two actually. Especially the game requires you to obtain quite a lot of XP, so it would have been a good way to grind up your levels between the quests, as sometimes you'll randomly get a quest at level 2 or something, and it requires you to be like level 35. And this kind of links into my fifth reason, since I don't like how low level quests in The Witcher 3 became, quickly irrelevant, since they wouldn't give you any experience when you were certain levels above that quest recommended quest level. Whereas in Skyrim, every single quest is always relevant no matter what level you are, since the game would scale to you. I don't think The Witcher 3 should have been a scaled game, but I think that the low level quests, should have been scaled up to your current level or something like that, along with the rest of the world, all the monsters in the world. But there obviously should still be a requirement to gain levels to go to the high level zones for the high level quests, because that's just the kind of game The Witcher was like. Another thing I didn't like about playing The Witcher 3 was how there was an attached story between the older games. Not completely. You could easily jump into The Witcher 3 and get into the story without getting too confused. But in Skyrim, this story in Skyrim just starts completely fresh, and you don't need to know anything about Oblivion or Morrowind. They could have set the third game at earlier parts of a story, perhaps during the books, or if you're going to make an aspect of a continuation story, then at least provide an optional recap cinematic or something like that. Obviously the story was quite fresh, but the only reason why I personally didn't get it confused was because I've read The Time of Contempt, which is a book which explains a lot about Ciri's character. It's when she's first introduced to the book. And now and again there were references to the previous games, and characters are just, they seem to have some form of relationship and history with Geralt, and I just personally couldn't remember because it's been years since I played the second game. For my seventh reason, I'll be complaining about the restrictiveness that the game forced on the gamer again, but how the game basically forced you to be a Witcher. But nonetheless, Skyrim had a lot more weapon choices and magic choices than The Witcher 3, which again made the game, each time you played the game, each time you replayed it and made a new save, it was just a little bit more interesting. Obviously the developers were trying to be as accurate as possible to the lore, since it's not traditional for a Witcher to use ranged weapons or magic like a sorceress. Even using a crossbow in The Witcher 3 was a little bit naughty, and they would have, Witchers basically don't have absolute no need to use a shield either, since they can parry arrows with their superhuman reflexes. But sometimes I just felt a little disappointed when you found some kind of dwarven axe or something in the game, but you wouldn't use it, since the stats would usually just be worse than any Witcher sword you can find, and it just felt like a bit of a cheeky tease on me. But anyway, that's just me. Another thing that made Skyrim more immersive was how when you saw a building, 99% of the time you could just walk in, whereas in The Witcher 3 there's just a little less freedom, since most of the buildings had no interior actually implemented. So in Skyrim you have more interiors, whereas in The Witcher 3 you had a bigger and more realistic city. I guess some people just have different preferences. I guess you could also talk about loot in the game. Skyrim basically just had much more realistic loot, and everything you saw on a corpse you'd be able to just pick up and equip, rather than the game forcing you to only be able to equip certain Witcher armor and certain Witcher weapons, with some exceptions. It was it was less looty game, it was less dungeon crawling, kill monsters, get loot, look in chests, and it was more of a craft game, like you go kill monsters, get reagents and craft things up, which I do prefer that in a way, but I think I just would have preferred like a stronger, more bulkier combination of both. For my second to last reason, I'm going to talk about, for some reason unscripted because I haven't written it yet, companions. I just, obviously you don't really get the opportunity to have a companion in The Witcher 3. I mean, sometimes in certain quests you did have someone tagging along with you, and it was really cool when someone did actually tag along with you. I guess, like, in the lore and story of The Witcher, Geralt is a very lonely character. He wouldn't really be going around with another person and adventuring, but sometimes, I just felt a bit lonely. It would have been cool to maybe have a follower, maybe even a pet. I mean, that might have been a bit weird, a bit like Fable 2, but maybe not. Anyway, my last reason is simply dragons, because I'll be honest with you, I've completely run out of ideas. I mean, dragons are just like a nice thing to see in a fantasy RPG. It's like the model fantasy creature, and they do exist in The Witcher 3, so it could have happened, but obviously they're extremely rare. The Witcher 3 did have wyverns, and technically all the dragons in Skyrim were actually wyverns, since they only had 4 limbs, meaning they didn't have 2 wings and 4 legs. But I guess the only serious point I can make out of this is how the dragons in Skyrim, or wyverns, whatever you want to call them, they were like proper invading the cities and towns. Like, they were random events in Skyrim, which, you just walk out of an inn event, all of a sudden there's a dragon attacking a town, which was a kind of a cool thing, which wasn't really that much in the Witcher, since, I mean, the monsters were harassing people, but it was more kind of incognito, more secretive and things like that. But yeah, maybe before I finish, I mean, maybe the Wild Hunt could have popped up now and again. Obviously, they were only really trying to find Ciri, they weren't really trying to end the world, but maybe they could have just popped up and started harassing people now and again. You would have to kill them, like, just as you're taking a stroll down Novigrad. I mean, sometimes you did get bandits randomly attacking you, like thugs and stuff, so maybe it would have been more interesting to have a little bit more of that, more dynamic and interesting events, rather than just going to a certain location and then expecting a certain thing to happen in there, rather than, the game just surprising you now and again. But anyway, it all just depends on one's preference. I mean, all the reasons I've stated that Skyrim could possibly be the better game in certain people's opinions, maybe the reason that you personally like The Witcher 3 more. So, whatever floats your boat, I always say. Anyway, lads, be sure to check out the video link in the description for more controversial, radical and subjectively nerd-aggravating lists like this. My name is the MetaGoblin, and until my next video, ciao.